one thing I forgot about. My name is Jason Guthrie, and I'm here today to talk to you about my experiences in the games industry. I suppose a little bit about me. I'm an ex-RGU alumni, and I actually studied for computing, for graphics and animations course. From that, I did my honours project creating an Xbox game using XNA. It was actually under Gordon's supervision, who I need to thank for organising this for me today. From that, this project got me enough recognition to move on to a next degree, which was an MProv in games development at Aberdeen. Now, even though I learned so much, this degree really wasn't for me. What it showed me is what the games industry is really like. Where you work in long hours, difficult shifts, and for people that generally do not care about you. So because of this, what it gave me is the inspiration to move on and start my own games company. And for the past year and a half, that's exactly what I've been doing. So, without any further ado, I'm going to move on to give you some advice. So if any of you here today are really passionate about making games, and simply that's the only thing you can picture yourself doing, I've only got one thing I need to say. Do it. It really is as simple as that. You don't need someone like me here, sitting here telling you how to do it. The games industry has moved on to coincide with the mobile revolution, where basically anyone can be a developer. So much so that the publisher's model is actually in question, because you don't need a publisher. Why would you? So with this in mind, industry where anyone can make a game, you need to ask yourself one more question, and I need to make an amendment to this. But only if you really want to. The games industry is not for the faint-hearted. It will push you to your very limits, and if it doesn't, you're doing something wrong. You have to doubt and question yourself at every turn, but at the same time, you can't question everything, and you need to learn where to draw the line to simply just get things done. Apple versus Windows. So, I'm an Apple fan. Who here thinks that Windows as an operating system is better than Mac? I get the Windows guys to raise their hands. Okay. Now, who here thinks that Windows makes more money than Mac? And same again, I get the Windows guys to raise their hands. Okay, that one's interesting.
Isn't more games on Windows available, actually?
I'll come back to that afterwards.
All right.
Okay, now, simply there by stating my opinion, I bet a few of you were like, oh my god, here we go, another Apple fan, another Mac fag. If you were thinking like that, you really need to look at yourself and you really need to change your perception. Because there's one thing that's only important in industry, it's the facts and the numbers. Your opinion isn't important in that sense, as long as you're getting the job done. Working in the games industry is like answering questions like this hundreds of times a day. And if you have someone on your team that simply cannot take someone else's view on board, or make an opinion on something without trying it for themselves, you're going to spend half your time arguing about something that really does not matter. Imagine yourself working in a pre-functioning team of, say, 10 people. The problem here is that this team is pre-formed. If you can't integrate well into this team, you're the one that's going to get fired. It doesn't matter if you've got the correct opinion. It doesn't matter if you're the best programmer or artist in the world. You're the one that's going to get fired. And you need to take that into consideration. This is why teamwork is so important in the games industry. Now, there's a problem here. In the games industry, there seems to be a lot of arrogance. People seem to make a game and think, I know everything about making games. It's not true. The problem here, I can summarize as something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. What is that? Basically, the effect occurs when incompetent people not only fail to realize their incompetence, but consider themselves much more competent than anyone else. So what does that mean? Basically, they're too stupid to realize they're stupid. The thing here is, making a game requires a lot of skill and a lot of learning. So as I said, when people get to the end of it, they sit and think, I know everything there is to make about games. Given enough time, I can make any game I wanted. This confidence is admirable, but it's not true. This spills over into arrogance, and if not, ignorance half the time. And because of this, it can get in your way. You really can't spend too much time focusing on it. Because of this, games involve you to continuously learn. You have to be open-minded. If you're not, you're going to miss the current trends. You need to look at what's happening and figure out, right, why is this happening? How do I do this? And you can't do this if you have pre-formed opinions. So what you really need to be doing is going out and doing your research. Now, doing your research can take a lot of time. Current trends are changing all the time. And in fact, for games, they're not just current affairs, they're actually future affairs. You're not trying to figure out what people are trying to play now, but you're trying to figure out what people want to play by the time you finish. Now that sounds easy enough, but look at Duke Nukem Forever. It took 15 years to finish that game. Try and picture what games are out in 15 years' time. It's really impossible to try and picture that. So this is why research is so important. And one of the ways I suggest to make it easiest is to follow some gaming websites like these. You don't even need to read the articles. Just skimming the headlines should give you enough information about what's going on in the industry. And then from there, you can figure out, right, I need to investigate this further, that further. It doesn't just apply to design. If you're a programmer, there's new techniques, new frameworks, and new engines released all the time, and it's your job to know about them. You need to be able to compare them, see their strengths, see their weaknesses, and figure out what you need to be doing differently with each one. For artists, this is just as true. Sure, the software isn't as important and doesn't change as wildly, but you need to understand your framework. You need to understand your limits. You don't want to be working with a device and be keeping your detail really low, only to find out you're not pushing your device. You could have got away with twice the detail. What do you do then? Do you start from scratch, or do you leave it looking a bit shit? That's not cool. One I would personally recommend here is GameIndustry.biz. It's actually known as Game Industry International these days. Don't know where the confusion of our lies. But it's quite good because it delivers the news in the industry perspective. And I do recommend, if you're interested, that you should sign up for the site. Okay, so say you've done your research, and I'm going to presume that you have your game design in mind. What next? How do you actually make your game? Well, to me, this involves putting together a team. And that's not strictly true, but I think it's vital. Take me. I can do any aspect of games development. I'm a programmer, I can do 3D models, I can make art, and I can compose music. But I am not an artist. My 3D models are shocking, and my music is just as bad. Making a team is about playing on your strengths. You don't want to try aim to be okay at 3 things. You should aim to be great at 1 thing. Because a team with 2 great people is going to be better than 1 person that's okay at everything. But putting a team together is not just about playing on your strengths. It's also about diversity. I'm a strong believer that when you make a game, you should make games that you want to play. Because who else knows more about what games you want to play than you? You shouldn't get too caught up trying to make a game that you think someone's going to want to play, because you simply won't know as well as they will. So because of that, that's where your diverse team comes into play. By putting together a diverse team, you can get as many personalities as possible working together on the game. I'll give you an example. Like I said, I'm a programmer, so I'm a slave to logic. I can't switch off, I'm constantly working, I'm extremely energetic, and you can't shut me up. So my way of relaxing is doing things like climbing mountains and jumping out of a plane. Now, my other half to his company, he's the artist. He can only be described as 1 thing. He's a creative, chilled out hippie, and he likes cooking and gardening. In that sense, we're exactly the opposite. We're polar extremes. But that's exactly what we're trying to do here. If we can make a game that both of us can enjoy, then surely that game applies to as many and wide a range of personalities as possible. If you're putting together a team, sure you want to do it with people that you get along with, but by doing that, chances are you have a lot in common, so you're only appealing to a short range of personalities. So if you're putting together a team, my one advice to give to you, look at yourself and picture your absolute polar opposite. They're your perfect teammate. This is why teamwork is so important, because by putting these diverse opinions together, you're going to get a lot of opinions. And if you're not open-minded about other people's perspectives, you're going to spend half your time arguing. So even though it's great to get these diverse people together, it's not going to make a difference if you can't actually work together. So now, I've told you about, you've put your team together, you've done your research, and you've got your game design. Where'd you start? Well, the first thing you need to do is decide how you're going to be making your game. So that's choosing your language, your framework, or your engine. This is all part of what's called your development pipeline. This is basically where you take your assets and you make sure you can get them into the game. It doesn't matter if your artist has a photorealistic model, image, or if your composer has a complete symphony. If your programmer can't get them in the game, you're not going to see it. And that's one of the most demoralizing things. You don't want to be working on something and not see it in the end product. Once you've got this down, the development pipeline is perfect for figuring out exactly what you can and cannot do in the engine. You don't want to figure this out halfway through the project and then realize you've been wasting your time. So from here, you move on to what's next called the alpha phase, which is basically getting everything working. What it is the development prototype of your game, where you make sure it has a complete set of features. It's really important to make sure everything's in there, and it's even better to make sure it's done as early as possible, so you can get a complete idea of what your game is, so you can go back and decide if you need to change your design or not. Now, this is vital that this is done completely before the beta phase. As soon as what's called the next phase, which is the beta phase, it's completely okay to complete your first prototype and change your mind and think, I could do this better, I could do this differently. That's normal, but so long as you don't move past the alpha phase. Now, the next phase, as I briefly mentioned, is the beta. This is the one you've probably most likely heard of, because a lot of companies open their games at the beta phase for things called public beta tests. This is where the public plays the game. To make it better, basically what you're doing is turning your demo into a game. And the way you're doing that is by something called balancing. Balancing is a term surprisingly few people have heard of, but it's incredibly vital to game design. So I'm actually going to give it its own slide. Balancing, it's hard to describe. There's no real easy way to say what it is. So I'll give you an example. Say you're playing your game and you have your giantly huge axe and you swing it against a rat. How much damage do you cause? That's balancing. It's basically where you take every single scenario in a game and compare them against every other scenario, situation, or object, and make sure they all make logical sense with a relationship between each other. So in a situation with a rat, when you hit it, say you'd want to do about 100 damage, but say the animal was threatening to threaten all life on Earth, you'd only expect to do 1 or 2. Balancing and taking everything into consideration is extremely complicated. There's no real tips and advice I can give you here. The only thing you can really do is keep at it until it finally makes sense. And it'll only really work if you give it more time and more practice. The only other advice I can really give you here is just take as many scenarios into account as possible by watching people play. This is exactly why the games companies open their beta test to the public, so we can see more scenarios or more people taking into account how they play their game. This way they can take their situation into their formulas, into their final formulas. So, I've kind of told you a bit about the overview about the development steps in making a game. I can't really go into them in too much detail because if I do, I'd be sitting here giving you advice all day. So instead, I'm going to give you 2 golden rules that apply to kind of any step of games development. The first one, unless it's broken, don't fix it. And the second one, don't reinvent the wheel. These sound really common knowledge, but they're broken so often you wouldn't believe. For programmers, this is especially true, and they don't apply to any field. For example, say you have a broken animation. A lot of programmers would say, let's fix this by putting in a physics engine. I've seen so many guys go out there and try to code their own physics engine from scratch. This sounds absurd, but sadly it happens. Programmers have and I'm guilty for it, programmers have a notorious habit for wanting to code everything themselves, so they know where it's come from, what it can do, and how fast it runs. The problem here is, it simply does not matter. The only thing that matters is the end product, not how you get there. The same applies for rules for unless it's broken. You're looking at a feature and you say to yourself, I could probably make that run twice as quick. Don't bother. If it's already working and it's not running down the game and thusly not a problem, don't try and fix it. You'll spend all day fixing problems that really do not need to be fixed. For artists, this is just as true. Say you've designed a new way of modeling everything that you do. You could reduce your poly count by 10%. Should you do it? Of course not. You're going to look exactly the same at the end of the day. So why spend your time remaking every model in your game if nobody's going to notice the difference? The same goes for don't reinvent the wheel. I think artists get too carried away modeling things that are really generic and really do not need to be modeled, such as rocks or barrels, or that seedy character in the corner that nobody's even going to talk to in your game that's going to take you 3 months to actually model. There's no sense spending this much time on something that people won't notice. Instead, go online and grab yourself some assets that have already been made. There's tons of websites out there. One I'd recommend is called Unity's Asset Store, because anyone can upload a model and make money from it. I've got another rule. This one applies more directly to programmers, so sorry to any artists out there. Now, has anyone heard of what is the official game development language? Does anyone know what it might be? Okay, that's really good. When I was going up for university and I was learning about games, people were always telling me, C++. Learn C++ because it is the official development language, because it's the fastest one hands down. There's some truth to that. If anyone tells you that, slap them really hard. This is an archaic and out-of-date view. It's an archaic and out-of-date view. There's no such thing as one development language anymore. I would actually go far to say that C++ is the worst development language. Why? Because it's the slowest to get anything done. It takes you twice as long just to do small tasks. And as a small developer, you're likely going to be working yourself up to bigger games. You're not going to be working on the next AAA title, so chances are you're not pushing your device. As long as you can get everything done, it doesn't matter how fast your games run, as long as your game is running. A lot of developers feel the same way. One term that's frequently thrown around is 60 frames per second. Basically means you're drawing to the screen 60 times in a second. A lot of developers ignore this. Did you know that Halo series actually runs at 30 frames a second? Why? Because by cutting the frame rate in half, cutting the speed in half, they can get twice as many objects in their game. And to them, and to me, that's more important. As a small developer, your one and most valuable asset is your time. It's the one thing that's actually going to cost you anything. So don't worry about speed, so long as your game can run. And with this in mind, I think engines are the only sensible way for anyone to move forward and to make a game with. Engines can literally do half of the work for you before you've even started it. And with this in mind, they're really cheap. I don't see why anyone would consider anything other than an engine. And to me, that is why there's no one development language. Each engine has their own scripting language or framework that you use. So in that sense, as long as you're doing your job properly, it doesn't matter which language you're using. I've told you a little bit about games development, but I've not really told you how to make your game stand out. And in that sense, there's only one real piece of advice I can give you, which you've already seen, and it's don't make games to make money. This sounds a little bit stupid on first sight, but it really isn't. I think a lot of indie developers really get too caught up in the money, and they forget about the actual game, and it suffers in that sense. Bit hard to take Minecraft as an example, but there's still because it's such an industry anomaly, but there's still an important lesson we can take here, and to me it's obvious. Focus on the game, focus on your product, and hopefully it will sell itself. And if you don't, you're going to have to do the work to sell it, and you're the one that's going to have to pay. Now I'm going to look into that a little bit further. I'm going to go back to Apple and Microsoft. These are two companies with two completely opposing ideals. Apple is always product-centered. Steve Jobs was obsessed with making the product absolutely perfect, to a point even the circuit boards and the code had to look neat. To other people, that's pointless. Microsoft are the opposite. They were in money to make money, and they're a business. They had no issues releasing sloppy products. Look at Vista. But the thing is, it didn't matter. He was good at his job, and Bill Gates made a lot of money. So much so that he was famously sued by Apple. Now you probably think, this is contrary to my claim. These guys are clearly making a lot more money, right? Which you didn't actually. Because every office and every home has a PC. Not actually what you might think. Did you know that Microsoft is the 5th most well-known brand in the world? Apple's the 1st. Now, everyone rates these differently. For example, some companies say that Coke is the most well-known brand in the world. But one thing that people don't do is that nobody says that Microsoft is better than Apple. Nobody says that they're known more than Apple. So let's look at some of our products. Microsoft has recently released Windows 8. It's their latest operating system, and it's completely shifted from a traditional PC model to their tablets. To me, that's a risky move, and it's 3 years late in the tablet market, but okay. So to justify this risky move, they made something called Surface. Surface has gone on to sell less than 1 million units. Considering the risk involved, that's shocking. The equivalent, the iPad has sold 100 million units. To me, this shows me one thing. Apple are making a lot more money. They're worth $30 billion more than Microsoft. In fact, the iPhone alone is worth more than the entire Microsoft product and chain put together. This doesn't really prove my point though, about products selling themselves. So let's look into the marketing of both companies. In 2012, Apple spent 1% of their sales on their marketing budget. That equated to a crazy $933 million. Let's look at Microsoft. They spent 2.2% of their sales on marketing. That doesn't seem like too much of a difference. But in actual fact, that equated to $1.6 billion that they spent on marketing. That's nearly half, nearly double. And they're spending this money consistently. In 2011, Apple spent $691, but Microsoft, they spent $1.9 billion. That's more than double the amount that they spent on marketing. What does that mean? It means that Microsoft have to work harder and have to spend a lot more money to actually sell their products. Now you might be sitting thinking to yourself, what's this got to do with games? This is business. Well, ask yourself, which model makes the most sense for a small developer? Making the product and polishing it to a point so you hope it will sell itself? Or are you going to spend the extra money on it? Do you even have the extra money to spend on a game? Marketing is incredibly expensive. And even if you do, how do you actually market it? I don't know about you, but I know nothing about marketing. That's not really true. I know enough about marketing to say that it's something I shouldn't get involved in, at least not without a degree. To me, ignoring the world's most #1 brand in the world about how they do business purely because you do not like their style is idiotic. You need to learn from what you can and look at the facts and numbers behind it. So, it's probably about time I should stop talking now. And you probably sit and think to yourself, I've not really told you how to make a game. So, let me remind you of my first point. If you really want to make a game, you don't need someone like me to sit and tell you how to do it. Chances are you already know, but you've just not put the pieces together yet. And anything you don't know, that's what the internet's for. Go find another company that's doing something that you want to do. Go see how they're doing it and why they're doing it the way they are. But the one thing to always keep in mind, it's an industry where anyone can be making a game. It's not for the faint-hearted, and if you're not willing to push yourself the extra mile, someone else will. And because it's an industry where anyone can make a game, if you do get a hit, don't let it go to your head. Don't get cocky. Okay, thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I'm going to show you a video of our latest game, and it's called S.D.G.T, and then after that I'll be taking any questions you might have. But anyway, yeah, they bought it, and they've released it in this free-to-play model, and it's done absolutely fine. But it cost 100 million to develop it as an MMO, which is a crazy amount. Like compared to, like I say, Call of Duty's 50 million, it's quite a bit. But it should be released on the 23rd, but it's actually been delayed on the market because I found a bug last night, so I had to take it down. I'm hoping that it's released by the start of March.